You know what's better than coffee?
Being child-free. What is up, everyone? It's Kelsey
And Kevin.
with Dyer the Child-Free. And we are so excited to bring you our new series, Episode 1 of Child-Free Coffee Chats, where we pull a child-free topic out at random and discuss it in the moment.
So, grab your coffee or tea.
And join in the chat. Today's topic is... Gotta get it. Having to learn how to act around kids. It doesn't always happen naturally.
That is a doozy. That is a doozy.
Especially if you don't really like children.
Yeah, that's one of the main things that I know. It's a little bit hard for a lot of people because if your daily life especially doesn't revolve around children and you don't want children, it's hard to kind of like almost like click off that adult brain to cater to a child. And don't get me wrong, I know a lot of people actually do have because of growing up with maybe siblings, but if you're like maybe an only child or the youngest sibling like myself, you didn't have that interaction with the younger kids like how an older sibling would. So that's always something kind of tricky that it can be for just people in general.
Well, that's what happened with me. I was the youngest and I had younger cousins, but not necessarily a lot of them. And so I grew up almost living as an only child. And so I never grew up learning how to necessarily interact with like younger kids or kind of bring on that baby voice or more, I guess, nurturing qualities to younger generations.
The baby customer service voice, because you have to change it with like, how's it going? You know, kind of mentality. And it's actually kind of funny because that didn't come to me until I was obviously relatively older, because that's when I started like, you know, being around kids more, whether it was because of like certain things with like volunteer stuff that I had to do in school that you go with like younger kids, or even with kind of somewhat work related and stuff like that with, you know, I mean, I played tennis my whole life, so I had to be around younger kids with helping out, you know, because parents would reach out to me like, hey, can you help my kid? Because they would see like that I could do certain things, so they wanted me to deal with their kids. And I even did it when I was like 15, and you as a 15-year-old trying to work with like a 10-year-old, let's say, or even like an 8 or 6-year-old and stuff like that, it's hard to kind of process because you just go like, well, this is just a kid, like what am I supposed to do with it? As you get older, you kind of, some people develop that, you know, instinct of how to like change their customer service voice, if you will, when talking to kids. But being the child-free like person, individual, even friends of mine that still have not had kids and they might want kids one day, but I don't know, I mean, clock is ticking, if you will.
No, we don't say that word in this community.
Oh. Well, no, for them, because they want kids in a sense. Not because like the clock is ticking, but like they want kids, but obviously they've been like, you know, waiting along too much that, I mean, it's funny to see them interact with kids because you're like, it's like that concept is still not in their head because they don't deal with kids often. So it's just kind of funny to see.
Also too, even for me, when I first started out working, I guess, within the general public, obviously I was never around younger kids. And so my small talk was already terrible, which is something I had to learn, which is another story. But you can't necessarily small talk normal points like you would with adults. With kids, you can't be like, oh, hey, how's the weather today? They don't want to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, but one thing I will give kids nowadays when you deal with them, and especially because honestly they're not your own, so I feel like when a kid that isn't like, you're not dealing with like your parent, right? Because everybody has had.
They'll be a little bit more open.
Well, they're more inclined to just have a conversation about randomness of their own, because you as a child sometimes you would have that rebellious, just, you know, stage where you're like, I don't care what my parents say, or I don't want to hear what my parents have to say, whether even if they like what I like, kind of scenario, because you just want to rebel. But the kids that you might interact with, they might just go like, oh man, have you seen my light up shoes? And you're like, man, why couldn't anybody ask me about like my shoes? Could they make me run faster? Like those conversations should be had even by adults, okay? By adults. So if you see me with some cool kicks, don't be afraid to say, whoa, can you run faster with those? Like, how's your balance with that? They look pretty sick. I mean, ask me if they light up. They might eventually. I don't know. They might.
And they should make adult light up shoes.
Skechers, if you're hearing this, it's up to you now.
Or any other brand, because people get bullied for wearing Skechers.
But Skechers were the ones that had them, I remember.
Oh, yeah.
That's the only reason why. I mean, obviously any brand that has
They have the copyrights, maybe.
Maybe, I don't know, but it's just kind of funny. But that's like the difference of conversations with even kids, because sometimes you don't know what to respond to their thought process, because you'll have a child sometimes that you might not even know come up to you and share a random fact like, I like dinosaurs, and you're like, yeah, man, that's awesome.
Me too.
Yeah, but you as an adult, if you don't know that how to handle that situation, because you're not surrounded obviously by kids, and especially like with us, we're not surrounded by kids at home, that we would have conversations come up with us like all the time.
You'd be like, okay.
Yeah, you'll see nieces and nephews here and there or something like that, but if your job requires you to be around kids, great, and everything, that's fine. But sometimes it catches you by surprise that they might say something that's not even relatively, not like inappropriate, but it's just like funny, that you're not supposed to laugh at, and then
you laugh, and you're like, their parent is like, don't say that, and you're like, oh crap.
Like, oh no.
You're like, well, it was funny, but they're not supposed to say it. It's like also like bringing up like nieces and nephews. I remember a while back, I'm better with it now, but I first became an aunt to my first niece when I was only 21 years old. And so when you're 21 and you've never really necessarily been around kids, that was kind of like something to learn how to navigate. And also, I feel like a part of me felt guilty for a long time because I felt like I wasn't being a good aunt. Now I'm a bit better because obviously I understand that I live out of the country because my family's from Canada. But it took a long time to feel, I guess, normalized with that, especially now that I have nephews and I now have a new nephew. And it's like building up that process throughout the years was a big learning curve to learning how to read. A big learning curve to adjust to and kind of like learn how to interact with kids, what they're interested in, and just kind of, I guess, copy what parents seem to do.
Yeah, and you also kind of, it's at least for like the learning curve to like act, especially naturally, where you're not.
It's not forced.
Yeah, because I mean, kids, we've all been one. So congratulations to all of us, I guess, on this common ground.
We survived.
But you notice a lot of kids do not like being talked down to as a child, because as a kid, we all get trapped in the idea of growing up and don't do it, it's a trap. Just saying kids, obviously nobody's gonna see that as a kid, but right now, but it is something that like you'll notice that for the natural conversation with them is like treating them as one of their friends would, right? So not necessarily like, let's say you're talking to a 5-year-old, you're not gonna talk to him like a little baby, oh my God, great job on taking your first steps, and the kid's been walking for a couple of years. But if you talk to him like how another 5-year-old would to him, for that comfort mainly, not because you're, oh my gosh, I wanna be a 5-year-old, but that comfort of reality of what their interactions are with most kids, they kind of see you as like, oh, okay, cool, you're just talking to me normal. Because we'll see it.
Probably something they don't get to that often, which is something I feel like we learned a lot, especially at work, is that when you talk to them like you're not necessarily their friend, but more of like a relatable figure, they'll be more inclined to listen, but also talk to you genuinely and not like you don't want to induce fear, but you also want to gain that respect. And I feel like that's kind of like interrelated to some degree.
Yeah, I mean, it's that authoritative kind of friend style where like obviously you want to have them to respect you, because for us we have to keep them organized, we have to keep them in check and everything, but at the same time we don't want them to feel in a discomfort or like how they have to do, because it's the way of the saying of like you got to lead the horse to water, you can't force it to drink. But if you trick them enough, that's my latter part of wisdom to add to that, is if you trick them of why they do need the water to kind of keep going and lead them that it's not in a sense of forceful way, they will do it, right? Because kids want to feel, and just in general, people want to feel like they belong to something. They don't want to be felt left out. That's why people like to do group settings of certain degrees. Obviously, if you're introverted, your comfort of group is yourself, right? That's where your comfort lies. But when you're a kid, as you're growing, it does suck to see other people doing something that you're not a part of. So if you kind of like bring that ideology behind it to them, they start feeling a little bit better to want to cooperate with you in a, whether it's more like real standard of like where they see you as an authoritative like kind of figure, in a sense where like they have to listen to you, but they're not having to rebel against you, because that's where like it shifts differently from parents to just a normal like person. Like a parent, as it like with the kid's gonna want to somewhat rebel because of that ideology, you know, like, you tell it to me all the time. They might get tired of it, that's fine. But finding that medium ground to say naturally, where like it's not feeling like it's very aggressive to them, or, you know, you have to learn how to do that customer service with a child, because you can't really say that you're wrong in a sense, but it's like teach them how to be right. So what do you think about the people that obviously being child free, their limited interactions with kids, and, you know, maybe their work is not related to kids whatsoever? Do you think that they should be, I don't want to say forced into learning how to talk to kids or not, you know? Because at the end of the day, everybody expects you to be like, well, family, obviously you're gonna have family friends that have kids eventually, and if you choose not to have any, how would you go, like, what would be the scenario where, like, it's, I mean, to me, it's in a sense that you're fine to say, like, you know what, I don't want to deal with this kids. Like, for me, for example, one example that it happened to me when I used to have a different, like when I was like working with some people, one of our coworkers had a kid and they kept trying to force on me to like even hold the baby and, you know, baby talk kind of style. And I genuinely just had to say, like, I don't do that. Like, I don't like to hold babies. I don't like to do that kind of stuff. And at first I thought it was playful, but then I just kind of had to, you know, reiterate, you know, like, hey, this is not for me.
I feel like with that, if it's not something you're having to deal with at work all the time, like let's say you work in a field that doesn't have children regularly and it's just like once in a blue moon that you have to deal with them, I would say it's not necessarily something that you have to worry about dealing with, because if that's not in your comfort zone, and let's say you're someone who doesn't want anything to do with children, you shouldn't be expected to have to adjust what you prefer to what other people expect of you, because I feel like obviously there's this assumption that everyone is in love with kids, they're gonna be great around kids, and obviously you're not gonna like go around and kick them, but they shouldn't be forced upon you like, oh, hold my kid. You need to respect my boundaries, that if I don't wanna hold your kid, you shouldn't be forcing your kid onto me, just like how if your kid, let's say, doesn't wanna hug someone or be around someone, you wouldn't force them to go do that. I mean, I'm sure we have enough trauma from that in general, but
it's a funny thing to me though, because I see parents always talk about boundaries with kids, but then they don't want to respect boundaries of people
adults
that don't want to do something. Like just in general, adults, doesn't even necessarily have to be like with a child-free thing, but like perfect example, like my boundary was like, I don't want to hold a baby,
and
because
you still
I
don't really,
and I genuinely don't. Like, I mean, I've carried my nephews in a sense once he's older, but like a baby thing,
it's like very, very rare.
It's not for me. I've never felt comfortable with it. It's because not necessarily because just of like not wanting kids. It's just I think it's not for me. It's just not it. Like I don't feel the comfort. I don't feel like it's, you know, something that I would want to do. It's better like your parents can just do whatever they need to, and that's fine.
Well, then it's always awkward too, because you never really do it, whereas I do, so I feel like people are used to it. Or maybe it's also because I'm a woman, but also it's like because you rarely do it now, if you ever do, people are like, oh my God, like look, and then it's like very centered, and it's like, okay, now I want to do this even less.
It's almost like the more somebody asks you to do something, the less you feel inclined to. Like, for example, everybody has a schedule, everybody has a system, and I mean, people might agree and disagree, but for example, like one thing that I remember as a kid with like my dad and my brother and myself is like household chores, right? Like, well, I'm doing something at the moment, and like, let's say my dad wanted something to be done at that moment. Like, hey, no, you have to do the dishes right now, but I'm in the middle of something. And for me, it was just like, well, okay, let me finish what I'm doing. I'll consider it in a second. Like, I'm gonna do it no matter what, but like, let me just finish what I'm doing. Rolls again, like, hey, you have to do this right now. And it just makes me not want to put the time and effort into it for a reason, because it's like, hey, you're not respecting my time and boundaries into this aspect that I need to go ahead and do what I'm finishing up. I'm going to do what you want me to do, but the more you keep insisting to happen, the less I want to now. And obviously this is the dishes part, but like in a sense, let's say going out with friends, the more you keep asking of something, maybe I just don't want to go, and then I won't go. And that's,
well, it's like creating almost like a negative, I would say similar to like how you feel when, what's the word? Starts with an R. Resentment. It almost like builds up resentment to the whatever it is that you're about to do, because you're like, oh, I'm going to get to it, and that buildup of anger and just frustration of like, I'm going to get to it, or just give me some time.
And the funniest thing about that aspect is when has anybody felt so great to being asked the same question over and over? And this comes down to, like, for example, being child free. Like, you're going to change your mind. Oh, when do you want your kids? You're gonna have kids soon. You're like, oh, why don't you want kids? You know, I'm like, the more you keep asking, the more I find ideas of why I don't want kids.
That's what gets brought up a lot. It's like, the more you ask me, it's almost like fueling that energy to, like, I almost like want to prove you wrong too, because you're like, I was already child free before, but now I'm gonna like really prove it to you that I'm never gonna have kids and anything of the sort.
And that's why, like, I would want to ask the people that, like, for example, that are always like kind of quote unquote preaching to be like, yeah, you're not a good person for not wanting to have kids and this and that. When has your mind been changed by somebody asking you repeatedly about one thing that you are not about over and over again? Like, when has that ever in your mind gone, man, this 152nd time that you've asked me the same question, you know what, you're right. I just want to change my mind real quick about something that I've, one, heavily researched upon. Two, it's my life experience and my personal choices that have no and zero effects on your personal life, because that's not even anything that's going to happen. And three, it's just not even, it makes sense for somebody to keep like bringing up the same concept of something that it just doesn't add any value to my life. And that's my personal being that they could essentially do themselves too. And
especially when you see their kids in their life and they're like, oh, I'm so tired. And you're like, yeah, I don't want that.
It's like the meme. I love this. Like, I think it was like the TikTok meme of like the, oh, don't lie to yourself, Samantha. Everybody wants this life or whatever. Because it's like, yeah, because they're always like the person, and it's funny because it's parents doing it. Like, the parents will let you know, yeah, maybe not, you know?
They're like, oh, I didn't know this would be like so hard. I'm always tired. I never have time for myself. Our weekends are always busy. But like, that doesn't sound as pleasing as you make it out to be.
My favorite one lately that I've seen is just like where like a couple is traveling with their kid or doing something with their kids, let's say, and he goes, oh, POV, you told me kids won't let you travel. It's like, yeah, they let me travel, but they just make things suck even more. And I was like, well, you're not wrong, because I've seen it with friends, I've seen it with family, going out to a simple, just like meeting up, let's say to a brewery like with family that we've had or something. We have to cater to where we sit for the children. We have to cater for the time because of their naps or whatever. We have to cater to literally everything that would have to be for the kids, rather than once in a while going like, you know what time could work for you guys? We'll either find babysitters for the kids to stay home so we don't have to bring them, or we'll plan their naps around that so that we can meet up at the time that works best for everybody. And that's when like people that, if you like, for example, being child free, if you're almost put in that uncomfortable situation, it doesn't become natural for you to talk to kids, right? Because let's say the same thing about comfort for the kid. Obviously, if you get thrown into hanging out with family at your nappy time, you're gonna be cranky, right? That's the cranky part. The same way that if you're a child-free individual and you get thrown into an environment that you're not comfortable with, like
even
dealing
like
with kids.
Centered with like parents around and they're talking about their kids, you're like, I have nothing to contribute to the conversation. Like, I don't want to talk about changing diapers or how your kid is on, I don't know, they're not napping or something, or what foods they don't like or like.
But it's just conversations that you cannot relate to, and that's what makes it even harder to find a way to dig your way out of that, you know, like quicksand situation, because the more you try to like almost like deal with it, the more you start sinking faster. So it's like a freak out mode, because that's why it becomes unnatural, because it's like a discomfort thing, when in reality it's just like, okay, like maybe if I wasn't put in the situation, I could deal with it better. And that's where I find like it becomes harder for most people to get into a natural habitat as a child-free person that doesn't deal with kids often, doesn't have that surroundment of like having to work with kids or be around nephews, nieces, you know, younger cousins all the time, to become natural to talk with them. It's like if you play a sport, let's say you play baseball, and all of a sudden we tell you like, hey, go play soccer, and you're like, whoa, this is not my sport. Like, how are the rules? Can I move this? Do I use my hands or whatever? It's a learning curve as you're going, obviously, because somebody will come, hey, no, you can't do that. Sure. But for some people, it might take a long time. For some people, it'll be a quick turnaround. But the naturality of it takes a while.
Well, even like with like the job that we do now, like when I first started, because it was only 3 years ago that I started working with you, I went from only seeing like a kid maybe once a month to like one time every like 3 months to like almost every day. And so that was like a big learning curve, and I didn't necessarily know how to act for the longest of time. I just copied what you did. But now it's like, I mean, some days are better than other days. I feel like more talkative with them, but sometimes I'm just like, I don't really say that much. And I feel like talking with kids is also a big factor on how they act with you, because if you have a kid who doesn't talk that much and you're trying to force a conversation, it just gets really weird and awkward.
Which is something that's good that you like touch base about, like obviously copying what I did with the kids because of my experience, right? That's a way to learn how to, you know, deal with, I guess, kids if you're a child-free person, that especially if you're not around them usually. Find cue points of people that are like maybe talking or how they talk to the kid to know the boundaries, obviously, because like I said, everything's about boundaries and learning how to make it natural. Is it going to be perfect off the start? Of course not. Like just like anything, I mean, structure of how to make the right tone, the right conversation subjects and everything with kids, it's a trial and error thing, but that's what we've gone to have to do, especially on the spot, because we'll have a new kid arrive. We have to figure it out really fast. How do they handle themselves and everything?
Make sure they enjoy it.
And it's funny because most parents will always go like, oh my gosh, you're probably great with your kids. And I'm like, yeah, I don't have kids. We don't want kids. And they're like, oh, okay.
I was like, what we joke about too is like the customer service. You're like smiling, you turn around, you're like, oh.
And
it's basically just like, it's like the customer service voice as an act, because you have to portray yourself a certain way to obviously make the general public happy.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like that's pretty much it when it comes to it. That's just the naturality of, if you feel comfortable to trial and error it, good for you. If you don't want to talk to kids in a sense because you have your boundaries, good for you too. Set boundaries, be happy with them. If people don't respect your boundaries, they're not people you need to be having around you anyway. And
well,
that's
obviously too, it's like if you don't work in a career that has to involve children, that's even better because you don't have to worry about that sort of thing. But if you're a teacher, let's say, or like you have a job like such as a sports coach, or you work around children in some shape or form, then maybe probably shouldn't work in those fields.
Yeah, or you know, figure it out, see what works best for you. And that's pretty much like the thought process of it. Make it your thing or make it not. The choice is up to you. But kind of empty over here.
Well, looks like we're starting to run low on coffee. So before we say goodbye, if you have anything you would like to add to today's discussion,
or if you have any topics that you would like us to add to the drawing board, make sure to leave a comment down below.
We want to thank you for listening to today's discussion and are excited for all the topics to come.
So stay tuned for episode 2.
And if you'd like to see more, make sure to like and subscribe to stay posted. And as always, keep being authentically child-free.